we are in a very transitional period right now when it comes to culture. So I think it's a really good time to take stock of who your brand is and how to ensure relevancy and resonance moving forward. When you've been around the block, as I have, you really start to see patterns in how people react to things and how things land in climates. You start to see connections and resonance, and it always ties back to culture. You don't necessarily need to care about the same things your customers care about, but you do need to understand why they care about those things. Stop looking at numbers and stop asking ChatGPT. Go talk to some real humans. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I thought I would kick us off on this lovely Thursday in July with a quote by Karl Marx. Who doesn't love a little bit of Karl Marx on a Thursday in July? It's classic, right? So the quote, you probably heard it before. I'm going to put my own spin on it. The quote is, "History repeats itself first as tragedy, second as farce, and eventually as hopecore content for TikTok." Obviously, that last part was my own addition. Karl Marx didn't know about hopecore content on TikTok, but I bet if Karl Marx had TikTok, he would have loved hopecore content on TikTok. That is a really silly, goofy way to start this episode, but I really wanted to dive into this idea today of resonance and timing and relevancy. And I think that quote, while it's very well known, we don't really think about it or dissect it very often, but it's so interesting and it's so true. And I think that we are in a very transitional period right now when it comes to culture, a lot of sort of moving pieces and shifts. So I think it's a really good time to take stock of who your brand is and how to ensure relevancy and resonance moving forward. I thought the perfect way to explore this topic would be the new Superman reboot. I have to also get into, before we really kick it off and dive into Superman, I wanted to also chat about nachos. Earlier this year, I taught one of our very cool and very smart exec team members here at Pilot House about the phrase nachos, again, coming back to my TikTok brain rot. But I taught him about reheating nachos, crispy nachos, the whole thing. It was a little bit painful. He is a millennial. Love. Anyway, I was using this sort of brain rot lingo in calls that maybe I shouldn't have been in retrospect, but I think that the nachos were a really fun trend in language, and I think that the concept of nachos are very interesting. If you don't know, this slang was used to basically describe someone's art or output in a way. A great and common example of nachos is people started saying that Lady Gaga was reheating her own nachos by sort of largely returning to her original production style and music genre with her latest album. I feel like that's the easiest way to introduce someone to what nachos are conceptually. So hopefully that made sense. But in my opinion, and there's no single definition of what TikTok brain rot slang really means, but again, in my opinion, nachos represent like an extension of you as a person or your brand. I think that, like I said, it refers to your art, the output, what you put out there. Those are your nachos. So a big part of the nachos combo seemed to revolve around reheating nachos, whether we were reheating our own nachos or reheating other people's nachos. The Lady Gaga example, again, very prime. And something very intriguing to me in my work as a political, creative strategist and sociology girly is understanding what makes a plate of reheated nachos good. What makes them crispy versus soggy? How do you successfully reheat nachos for different tables of very hungry people? This is kind of getting away from me already. I've already talked about Karl Marx and Superman and nachos, but it's all hopefully going to make a lot of sense. I think the most satisfying reheated nachos, the really crispy and fresh ones, they tend to be the ones that successfully resonate with the current culture. They strike a chord. Because we're talking about Superman, this is going to be a very hopeful episode. And I think generally, I'm just a bit of an optimist as well, but I do firmly believe that all nachos are worth reheating. It's just in how you do it, in my opinion. So, yeah, let's get into some history first around Superman, where Superman came from, how he came to be, because I think it'll help us contextualize his sudden sort of resurgence and relevance and success in 2025. So, who is Superman? Superman was created in 1938 and has since been featured in a very wide variety of media. He started off as a comic book character created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster. Jerry and Joe met in 1932 and they bonded over their love of fiction, especially science fiction, and they started working together as most artistic people with common ground do. They self-published some works as short stories with accompanying illustrations at the start. The first Superman reference, this was so interesting to me. The first Superman reference was actually a character they created named Bill Dunn. It's a little weird. Bill Dunn was a character who was a homeless man who was tricked by some scientists into consuming a new and experimental drug, which gave him powers like mind control. Bill Dunn used his powers to get ahead, to try to change his circumstances. And he's in no way what anyone would consider a superhero. He was actually sort of the villain of those stories, which is so interesting. Superman, as a name, started as sort of a way to incite fear that this guy was so powerful and he didn't have sort of any morals and he was being quite villainous with his power. So it was called the Reign of Superman, which I also thought was very interesting. But yeah, the first iteration of Superman from his creators, Jerry and Joe, he was actually a villain. So interesting. Eventually, the boys, Jerry and Joe, they did shift into comics, moving a bit away from the more serious and kind of scary science fiction that they'd been creating before, and they started to focus on the pillars we know and love about the superhero genre today. They focused on creating work that was full of adventure and humor and laughter. Their goal was to become a syndicated comic strip, which is the most 1930-something goal you could have. It's basically like wanting to be an influencer today, I feel like. But yeah, their goal was to have a syndicated comic strip, and the feedback they heard was to get more sensational, be more original, give them the old razzle dazzle. The hungry table was looking for new nachos, so they revisited this character of Superman. The boys noted that the successful comics were focused on the protagonists, the heroes, so that inspired the decision, I think, to take Superman from villain to hero. And here is where the plot really thickens, in my opinion. They were looking to secure a deal with Consolidated Book Publishers who had recently published a comic book called Detective Dan, Secret Operative 48. Again, that name itself for a comic book is so like 1930s, it's very funny. Detective Dan was unique in that it was all original comics. For context, around this time, comic books were typically comprised of reprints that had already been in newspaper stories. The boys had a few chats with Consolidated, but eventually Consolidated pulled out because the Detective Dan sales were pretty disappointing at the time. So in the comic book culture of the late 30s, what people were expecting, what they liked, was to purchase collections of comic strips that they'd already known and loved. So they're sort of up against that in formulating what we would come to know and love as Superman. Upon this rejection of sorts, our good friend, Jerry Siegel, decided that he would start looking for a new artistic partner. He felt that the combination of a young and inexperienced writer alongside a young and inexperienced artist was holding him back. He wanted to bring in an artist with more of a name to make the path to publishing easier for himself. When he told Joe Shuster this, Joe was very quite upset. So upset that he actually burned the only copy of the Superman comic book that the two had prepared for Consolidated Book publishers. That is a crash out to end all crash outs, and I love that. I honestly think that was a very valid reaction from Joe, but it is really wild to think about the fact that a Superman comic was created for the first time and we don't have access to it. And it is in a way a good thing because I think it was quite different than what we eventually landed on. But yeah, it's so crazy how stuff like that happens in history, how they had a full Superman comic book that we just don't get to see. But Siegel kept looking for other artists to partner with. In July of 1933, he brought on a guy named Leo, and the two collaborated for a bit, but didn't get anything published, and none of these strips are around for us to see today. They were just sort of lost in time, I guess. And then in 1933, Siegel started working with a Chicago-based artist named Russell Keaton. With Keaton, Siegel dove deeper into Superman's backstory. It was a bit different than what we know now, but it was in this era that the pseudonym Clark Kent came into play, which is really interesting and really cool. It was so early that he kind of discovered this alter ego character. These strips were also eventually rejected. So Siegel returned to his original artist and partner, Joe Shuster. As someone who has worked on the agency side of things for the past couple of years, this timeline really checks out and makes sense. I think sometimes people feel really weird when clients hire, fire, and then rehire agencies. But one of my favorite client relationships ever was sort of born out of that dynamic. And I think there's some real magic to uncover when both sides really put their ego away and they just cook. Not to keep with the nacho theme too literally, but for me, creative collaboration is really rooted in trust. And I think nothing builds more trust than in this process of partnership when we leave, we go apart, and then we come back together. I think that coming back together always breeds a really magical level of trust in one another if we're collaborating on a really creative level. So bygones be bygones, the boys got back together. This is also kind of a side note, but I've never been a huge fan of reality TV. I've been looking to get more involved there, and I do feel like what I just described is kind of the plot of The Ultimatum on Netflix. I'm not 100% sure, but I do feel like that's it. It's like you either get married or break up, and I feel like just to be clear, that's not a good idea for relationships. I would only say it's a good idea for professional, creative collaborations, not for actual relationships. That seems crazy. Anyway, I don't think there's anything wrong with coming back together. Don't take things too seriously. I love that this is part of the story of Superman. I think it's really important and it's a great example of, working through personal stuff, ego, and creating something that actually makes history. So when the boys reunited, they really did truly start to cook. They had a lot of ingredients that would eventually go into the Superman that we know and love today. Together, Siegel and Shuster struck a deal with a publishing company called Wheeler Nicholson. They produced other adventure comic strips for them, but didn't create any Superman comics, which I thought was really interesting. Wheeler Nicholson had some major financial issues, so the boys saw really inconsistent payment for the work that they were doing for them. So they made the decision to keep Superman separate, which I think was really smart because eventually Wheeler Nicholson went bankrupt and was seized by other publishers / general businessmen of the 30s. It was in 1937 that the guys who seized Wheeler Nicholson met with Siegel and Shuster. They asked Siegel and Shuster to produce a comic strip for a new comic magazine called Action Comics. Eventually, all this came down to the boys getting Superman published. There was some slightly interesting backstory there that I'm not going to go into too much around publishing and how they kind of struck that deal, but for now, we'll just keep it at high level. For their work, this was so fascinating for me. For their work for Action Comics, they were paid like $10 a page. Even when you convert that, it wasn't really that much. That is the life of an artist and a writer, I suppose. You come up with Superman, you premiere him in a comic magazine, and you get paid $10 per page. That is wild. The revised and more familiar Superman was published, though. After getting paid $10 a page, the boys did it, and it was published in April of 1938. The entire issue was hugely successful, and a big part of that being this new novel beacon of hope that was Superman. That original issue actually follows the origin story that we all know and love today. His alien planet is in trouble, it's being destroyed, he's the only one who fits in the ship, and he crashes on Earth around a farmhouse where he's raised by the Kents. Superman struck a chord back then in 1938. The nachos were fresh, they were hot, and the work that Siegel and Schuster did as artists depended a lot on cultural cues that they were taking at the time. They were looking at what type of things were working in comic books, what type of things were being published in newspapers. They were really, like I said, focused on getting a syndicated comic strip, and so they were really open and in tune with what was working and what people wanted to read in comics. As we know, eventually there were Superman radio shows, we'd see Superman-only comics, TV shows, movie franchises, sort of anything you could imagine. Superman is the superhero. And as you can see, it was actually kind of a struggle to find him and to get him out there. It was difficult to first carve him out of the marble, and then it was really difficult to get the statue in front of people. It was not an easy process, but like I said, it depended heavily on cultural cues, which I think is a great lesson for anyone trying to create anything and strike resonance and relevancy today. So what does this have to do with building a brand and marketing materials? Great question. We think a lot about resonance when we're formulating creative strategy over here at Pilot House. We think a lot about culture and how things are going to land in that culture. I think about this specific topic of resonance and timing quite a bit. When you've sort of been around the block, as I have, you really start to see patterns in how people react to things and how things land in climates. You start to see connections in resonance, and it always ties back to culture. It's a real chicken or the egg situation. How do we drive resonance? Can we force resonance in specific cultural moments? It's all, I think, a really valid question to ask ourselves as marketers and reflect on when we're formulating brand strategies. Superman and this current reboot is, in my opinion, an almost perfect example of resonance that has come to us through relevancy and timing. A few weeks ago, we put out a series of pod episodes about different generations and how to best market them. And one of the generations that we didn't cover, because I figured we're not really actively marketing to them anymore, is the silent generation, which came before the boomers. And so something very interesting here with Superman and Siegel and Schuster is that they were part of the silent generation, which is now often being compared to Gen Z. And doubly interesting is how successful this new Superman movie has been with Gen Z audiences. It's also been interesting sort of across the board that it's been successful, but I think particularly what I've seen in the critiques around it and the praises around it, a lot of the praise is coming from a slightly younger demographic, being Gen Z. At the time of recording this, the 2025 Superman reboot has generated over $400 million in box office sales after about 2 weeks of being in theaters. And what's so interesting about this figure is that at this point in time, over half of the revenue made has come from domestic ticket sales. So some background info that I found while researching this episode is that typically superhero movies tend to perform very well globally. I actually did know that because I do have a fascination with sort of the state of Hollywood. So superhero movies tend to do quite well globally because they fit like any market. You don't need any cultural context. It's not that difficult to dub them because they're light on plot, heavy on action. We're often just throwing big things around, flying around in the sky and fighting each other. So it's really easy to package these movies up and market them abroad because there's just way less heavy lifting to do than like a very contemporary artsy film. Superman is also a very American superhero. He's a small town boy with big dreams of just doing good and being kind. And for a while, that just was not enough to get people in theaters. My cousin is a huge Superman fan. He has been his whole life. I have made fun of him endlessly about it. And he was actually an extra in one of the Man of Steel movies. He ended up getting cut from the final shot, which was very sad. But I remember we all got together as a family and went to see the one that he was supposed to be in. And I'm going to be honest with you, that movie sucked. I did not like it. I don't care if the nerds are going to tell me that I don't know enough about Superman or superheroes in general to make this call, but I'm making it and I feel totally correct. Those movies sucked. That Superman iteration was not well liked. He did not resonate with people. it was like a really boring and annoying and dark and brooding movie. So what makes a Superman reboot resonate? Why did we just see one that was so unsuccessful and now we're seeing one that feels really successful? How are we supposed to create resonance? Is it really all up to sheer dumb luck and timing? And why now, when the entire world is sort of freaking out and in doomsday mode day after day, are we all going back to the Superman bandwagon and the original Superman nachos? Like I mentioned, Superman is quintessentially American, and it is a very weird time culturally for things that are very American. And I think that sort of lends itself to its really fantastic performance domestically and lighter performance globally. I haven't seen Superman 2025, although I am very excited to. At this point, the plan is I'm going to go this weekend because it was my dad's 60th birthday. So we're going to do dinner and a movie. That's just a cute fun fact. And we're going to see Superman. But everything I've seen about this movie is that Superman has just returned to being really good and kind and kind of dorky. It's really a true return to form. As we all know, Superman was originally a villain, so it's not, I guess, the truest return to form, but it is a return to the fully loaded nachos that catapulted Superman from quirky adventure comic strip character to full-blown icon. He does what's right, he falls in love with a very cool lady named Lois Lane, and he wears his silly little shorts, and we're all eating it up. We are starving for these nachos. And I think it actually makes so much sense when you think about it that people are so in love with this movie and this reboot, and that it is striking that chord of resonance. We have like real life supervillains lately in real life, so obviously people are going to connect with and celebrate actual superheroes like Superman. There's no more think pieces. I did see and enjoy the Avengers Civil War, where they're all like fighting over the philosophy of being a superhero. But I think that everyone as a collective is just really excited to see a dorky guy doing good, kind things. There is no denying that right now people are resonating very deeply with this idea that you can restart, reboot, and choose kindness and goodness just like Superman. So much has gone into creating this environment where this message is going to strike a chord that was totally out of the control of DC and Warner Brothers and James Gunn. I want to point out that these nachos did not magically come out so crispy, but there is that element of timing that we've kind of been talking about where is it just sheer dumb luck? Do you just have to do the right thing at the right time? Sure, a little bit of this is just things falling into place in a very exciting, significant way. But I believe at the core of this new Superman success is some really smart choices that were made by Warner Brothers and DC to bring on James Gunn as the writer and director of this Superman reboot. He's the man responsible for Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a superhero franchise that really perfectly encapsulates millennial humor and their like need and desire for nostalgia. This guy knows his way around an air fryer. He knows how to both assemble and reheat nachos. There's no way to plan for culture. Like James Gunn could not have known the overall vibes inside and outside of America when he signed on to make this Superman reboot. But what he did have was context and also probably a little bit of disdain for the previous run of Superman movies and the knowledge and wherewithal to really pinpoint what went wrong there and also to be hyper aware of the superhero fatigue that had been hitting box offices already. He was part of the Marvel machine, so surely James Gunn understands superhero fatigue and sort of IP rage. So instead of thinking too deeply about anticipating the political climate that he would launch his Superman into, it seems like James Gunn has instead just focused on avoiding previous mistakes and instead building the type of Superman that really appealed to him, which I think is a fantastic idea. I don't know James Gunn, but he seems like the kind of guy who just loves superhero movies. So why not make a superhero movie with the superhero to end all superheroes that appeals to him? When I'm working and speaking with founders on how to develop a brand and marketing materials that will resonate and drive relevancy and perpetuity for a business, a really big part of that comes back to reflecting on culture and on history and on behavioral patterns, which I feel like is sort of what James Gunn did to prepare for Superman. So how do you do it? How do you go about understanding the culture of your customers so you can create products and marketing materials that resonate with them? Like I kind of warned you, this is a very hope-core episode, but you need to have a genuine curiosity about people in your work. One of the greatest lessons I think I learned as a political strategist is that I was really no better as any Joe Schmo off the street. Sure, am good at math and a quick reader, which gave me some advantages in that space and still does. But the skill that I've honed, taught, and encouraged in my coworkers now is really very simple. I think to create exciting advertising and to create resonance, you need to be able to go out into the world and love people. It sounds so dorky and lame, but Superman is also dorky and lame, so I'm using it as an excuse to be dorky and lame myself. But you need to be excited about what your customers are excited about, or at the very least understand why they are excited about it. You need to actually care about those people and why they are the way that they are, because that's where the magic happens in creating resonance and relevancy. If I wanted to create a brand that only focused on people exactly like myself and only sold things that are specific to people exactly like myself, I wouldn't have to worry about any of this. And the same goes for you. If you don't want to grow your brand, if you don't want to see your business reach new audiences, then fine, go on not caring about people and not carrying that curiosity. Good advertising is just really efficient and successful resonance and relevance done repeatedly. And to do those things, you need to have almost a delusional belief in the human experience. We've been in this era now, and I think we're sort of starting to exit it, where people consume a lot based on nothing. So they buy things that are trending because they're all over their social feeds. They buy things that they constantly get bombarded with ads for. There's no real vibe in it. There's no humanity. But I think the success of Superman and some other sort of markers in culture help signal a return to true form for most people as well. And typically, a return to form means getting back in touch with your tastes and your preferences. It's like James Gunn giving Superman his silly little shorts and his outfit and his silly little dog. It all comes down to taste, which I think is really difficult to predict, but also really crucial to your success as a brand. So brand is just going to get a lot more important over the coming years. Product development is going to play a huge part in your long-term success, in your ability to resonate and stay relevant. It's all about really honing in on taste, which is very interesting. And I think a lot of the times we tend to think of taste as something that's a little bit hoity-toity, but it's just what you like and don't like as a person. The investment you make into this kind of research and thinking is really going to be what's going to set you apart. So my advice for brands, sort of looking at their cold nachos, looking at really stagnant growth and wondering how to break out of it and where to go from there, is to get back in touch with your original nachos. Get back in touch with the essence of your brand. I recently did an episode about this and we posted the resources on my LinkedIn, but try out a message box. Even if you already feel like you know everything there is to know about your brand, try out a message box. Do activities that force you to think differently and go outside. Go to the places and the spaces that your customers love. Go where they feel really safe and seen, whether that's, again, going outside, going to actual spaces, or going on the platforms that they love, intaking the content that they really engage with. It's so important to approach that research like you're looking to make new friends or find new hobbies. It's so important to be open in that research and really hear and witness everything that's going on. Because like I said, you don't necessarily need to care about the same things your customers care about, but you do need to understand why they care about those things. So sometimes you just have to stop looking at numbers and stop asking ChatGPT, and you have to go talk to some real humans. It'll be okay. I'm sorry, but that's what you have to do sometimes. Humans create culture. Culture is the sandbox in which relevance and resonance exist, and relevance and resonance are key ingredients to the long-term success of your business. So just do it. Go figure out how humans are creating culture, what is going on with them, and like I mentioned, really get into what they care about. And if you can't find it in yourself to care about it as well, really get into and focus on understanding why it matters to them. Why are the reviews of your product skewing towards one benefit or USP? What makes that thing important to your customers? Those are the questions that if you don't have an answer to, I get really nervous when I talk to those types of brands who are just sort of depending on lightning in a bottle relevancy. Like I said, you can go out there, you can create a brand that's reflective of yourself, make products that are only going to appeal to those people, but eventually you're going to hit a spot where you can't grow anymore. And that's really scary. That's when I start to speak with a lot of brands. And this is usually sort of the first step in breaking out of that. It took Siegel and Schuster years to get the Superman formula right. But they eventually did. They workshopped it. They stayed abreast of what kids wanted in comic strips, and they were acutely aware of what was being published and what was successful and what was in demand in the world of adventure comics. So much so that what they created is incredibly successful almost 100 years later. This made up guy in a cape wearing a silly little outfit, he still resonates with audiences today. More so now than it did a few years ago. And that part is up to timing, of course, but the actual core nachos that they made were so good, you can reheat them again and again. So the sort of main thesis here is that timing does come into play when we're talking about relevancy and resonance. There are going to be ups and downs, but as long as your original plate of nachos is good enough, all you need to do is figure out how to reheat them for the climate that you're in. That single sentence, I think, would send a Mad Men era marketer into orbit and misery, but I think you and I, we get it. It makes sense to us in our brains. Okay, that was a really fun episode, and I feel like we touched on a lot of things that I love, like Karl Marx, the nachos thing, also kind of softly making fun of my cousin for liking Superman. I can already guarantee that anyone who truly loves Superman probably hates everything that I said, and I probably got some things wrong. So I'm very sorry if you are deep in this superhero, Superman lore. I did my research as best as I could and took my own learnings from it. But yeah, I think the core message of this episode is that if you want to be successful long term, you need to strive for resonance and relevancy. And those two things don't happen if you do not understand your customer. So if you don't understand your customer right now, please reach out. I love one of my favorite things to do is looking at an ad library, hopping on a call with a brand founder or creative director and asking them point blank whether or not they feel secure in their personas and their knowledge of their customer, because I can tell by looking at your ad library when you can or cannot say yes or no to that question. So reach out if you're really not feeling sure how to relevancy and resonance max in your own brand. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you are. Drop us a comment, drop us a rating. I'd really love to hear from you and hear any ideas for any other type of ads or theories in ads that you want to hear about. The next time I record an episode, I will have seen Superman, and it will probably be very evident because I will be very hyped. Thanks for listening, and I'll chat to you guys next week.